Hello, everyone. So today we're going to go over some interesting mind-altering substances and a bit about their metabolism. So this is purely an interest lecture, but I hope you enjoyed this lecture as much as I did making it. There are some pretty interesting stories about substances in this lecture that we're going to talk about. So let's get started. Now, the first substance we're going to talk about is the iron rod. So the iron rod was first experienced by a man called Phineas Gage. So in the 1850s, Phineas Gage was a construction worker working on the railroad. During this time, he had an accident that left an iron rod penetrating through his skull and into his frontal lobe of his brain. So now this completely changed the man, which makes sense considering that the frontal lobe that was completely destroyed by the rod is associated with personality and regulating emotions and behavior. So before the accident, Phineas Gage was described as a hardworking and responsible man who was efficient at his work. However, after the accident, his doctor described him as an impulsive, rude, and generally unpleasant man to be around. Now, the accounts of Phineas Gage's behavior change might be a tiny bit exaggerated because there is evidence to suggest that his doctor exaggerated Phineas Gage's conditions post-accident. So, for instance, his doctor said in his reports that Phineas Gage has never held a job for very long after the accident and would keep changing his occupation. However, based on the records, Phineas Gage only held 2 long-term positions in the rest of in the 10 years that he lived after the accident, which would indicate that the doctor might be exaggerating his reports about Phineas Gage's rudeness, impulsiveness, and other traits, negative traits. Now we're going to go over another example of mind-altering substance. So in the Middle Ages, there was this illness, a prevalent illness called ergotism. Or in the Middle Ages, it was called St. Anthony's fire. So it was named St. Anthony's fire because this illness caused a characteristic burning sensation in the limbs of its victim, and also because the church declared this illness to be a result of sin or a prelude to entering hell. Now, the other symptoms of ergotism includes convulsions and gangrene. So gangrene is when you cut off blood circulation to an area of your body, resulting in that area of the body breaking down its tissue. So the scientific reason why ergotism occurred was because ergotism is caused by consuming rye bread that has been contaminated by ergot fungus. So ergot fungus produces ergot alkaloids, which produces the effects of this illness. So this is what ergot contaminated rye looks like. So whenever you see rye like this, do not consume it. Otherwise, you have to go to the hospital. So this is the biosynthetic pathway of ergot alkaloids in fungus. So ergot alkaloids is derived from tryptophan and can go through different branching pathways in order to produce ergot alkaloids, such as this one and this one. Now, depending on what ergot species that you're looking at. So interestingly, one of the intermediates of this pathway is lysergic acid, which is a precursor to LSD. So lysergic acid can be combined with diethylamide in order to synthesize LSD. So this reaction was first discovered accidentally by a man called Albert Hofmann So Albert Hofmann in, I believe, 1938, unknowingly synthesized LSD via this reaction when he was researching lysergic acid. And he also accidentally became exposed to LSD and went through a high that he described as a constant stream of random images. And after that, he intentionally started consuming LSD and became a big advocate of LSD. He said that the drug was medicine for the soul and believed it to be an effective therapeutic drug against mental illnesses. And he was very frustrated that there was a worldwide prohibition on LSD. Now, the effects of LSD is pretty well known. So it's a hallucinogen that alters thoughts and feelings. In fact, there's even a genre of art called psychedelic art that is pieces that are inspired by artists undergoing hallucinations, which is why all these psychedelic artworks would have such random streams of images similar to one's experienced after consuming LSD. So there are other physical effects of LSD. However, they're not as obvious as the hallucinations that you would experience. Now, the mechanism of action of LSD is not well known at all. So probably because LSD is prohibited in most, I believe it's all countries. So there hasn't been a lot of research on this drug. But what we do know is LSD is an agonist of the serotonin receptor 5-HT2A. So what this means is that serotonin can bind to the serotonin receptor and simulate the same response as serotonin. So LSD was also studied during Project MKUltra. So during the Cold War, the CIA started a project called MKUltra to develop mind control methods via human drug experimentation. The goal of the project was to facilitate interrogations with the Soviets by manipulating their mental states. And LSD was one of the many drugs that was studied in this project. So what they would do is they would use these drugs on their captives and couple that with torture methods in order to figure out what the best interrogation method is to extract information from their subjects. And the general conclusion from this project is that the effects of LSD was too unpredictable and LSD should not be used for interrogation. And shortly after they stopped studying LSD in this project, they also discontinued the project itself. So now this story is coupled with another interesting story about LSD. So Dr. Lewis West was a former leader of the project MKUltra, and after leaving the CIA, he continued to conduct LSD-based research. So he and a group of researchers started studying the elephant mating season frenzy called must. So during this frenzy, elephants display self-destructive and generally disruptive and violent behavior. And the scientists would like to study this behavior in order to control elephants that were in captivity during the mating season. So Dr. Lewis West and other researchers hypothesized that if they injected an elephant with LSD, then the elephant would go into this mating season frenzy, and then they can use this organism in order as a model to study must. So he and the other researchers injected an elephant with a high dose of LSD. The dosage was 25 times higher than what a human would require in order for him to start seeing hallucinations. So shortly after the injection, the elephant started experiencing seizures and died, despite the researchers' efforts to revive him. So after that, there was a lot of controversy involving animal ethics in terms of research. So obviously this research wasn't done ethically. The researchers should have injected the elephant with a lower dose of LSD if they wanted to test their hypothesis, and then work their way up until they see an effect. But it makes for an interesting story. Now onto marijuana. So marijuana, as everyone knows here, is extracted from a plant called cannabis. And marijuana is mainly composed of THC and CBD. So these compounds are produced by the cannabis plant as a defense mechanism against insects, UV, and other environmental stressors. Now, the legal status of recreational marijuana possession is generally illegal in most countries. So except, of course, Canada and other states in the US. But worldwide, it's generally illegal. Despite this, the WHO reported that marijuana consumption has a prevalence rate of 2.5% of the global population. So it's a very popular drug despite its legality status. Now, marijuana, as I said before, contains THC and CBD. Both of these metabolites are extremely similar looking. So the only difference is here, and these two metabolites acts on the endocannabinoid system in humans, which is a cell signaling system that is involved in a variety of important functions such as sleep, motor control, etc. So THC is the metabolite that causes the feeling of euphoria. Meanwhile, CBD is the metabolite that reduces the adverse effects from THC. So despite these molecules being very similar, they have opposite effects on each other. And the biosynthetic pathway of THC and CBD in cannabis plants are extremely similar as well. So they both are derived from a compound called CBGA. So the first step of synthesis requires a synthase step. And then the next step requires a decarboxylation for both THC and CBD. Now, the mechanism of action of THC and CBT is not completely known, but what we do know is that it acts on the endocannabinoid system. So THC would bind to a receptor called CB1, which is an endocannabinoid receptor that is located mainly in the central nervous system of humans. And after THC binds onto the receptor, it reduces the release of neurotransmitters by the presynaptic neuron. And because it reduces the number of neurotransmitters that are released, that means you get less nerve impulses. Now, CBD has the opposite effect of THC. So it would bind on the same receptor as the CB1 receptor and prevent THC from binding onto the receptor, which means that the neurotransmitters are released as usual. So this system can be activated using endocannabinoids that are produced from the body. So these two are endocannabinoids that are from the body and can have the same effect as THC and CBD. Now, the catabolism of THC in the human body occurs in the liver. So THC is first converted to this compound and then this compound, and then it is added onto a glucuronic acid. And then this acid is then excreted from the body into the urine. Now, THC and all these other intermediates in this pathway can be detected in human bodily fluids such as urine, hair, saliva, basically any human fluid. So that is how cops are able to detect whether someone has consumed marijuana recently through the detection of THC and these other intermediates in the urine or saliva. Now, marijuana also has medicinal purposes, or its proposed medicinal purpose is it can provide pain relief. So it is thought to have a positive effect on all of these diseases. However, if you look at the research behind whether medicinal marijuana is an effective pain reliever, there's actually very low evidence to support this. So based on a pooled study of 47 controlled studies, they found that 29% of people who were treated with cannabis reported a 33% reduction in pain versus a 25.9% of the placebo group who reported a 30% reduction in pain, which means that only an additional 3.1% of the people who were treated with marijuana reported a 30% reduction in pain over the placebo group, which doesn't support the medicinal marijuana as a pain reliever. Now, onto another really popular mind-altering substance, alcoholic beverages. So alcohol has been around for a long time, predicted to be around for 9,000 years in human history. So these alcoholic beverages contain ethanol as a result of ethanol fermentation by yeast. And alcohol is a depressant. Oddly, it causes euphoria, and it also causes a decrease in anxiety and increased sociability. The recommended intake of alcohol is less than 14 alcohol units per week. So you all should probably keep this in mind since everyone here is still in university. So 1 alcohol unit is equivalent to 10 mils of pure alcohol. And this is all the different types of drinks, alcoholic beverages, and the alcohol units associated with each one. For instance, so 1 bottle of wine is 9 alcohol units, which means you should definitely not drink 2 bottles of wine per week. So the alcohol consumption per person globally is as follows. So it looks like there are a couple of European countries here that consumes around 15 liters of alcohol per person per year, which is quite a bit. And on average, females consume less alcohol than males, consuming around 0.7 drinks per day versus males who consume around 1.7 drinks per day. Now, this is the proportional number of alcohol attributed deaths overall worldwide. So it looks like Russia and some countries near Russia has a high proportion of deaths that are related to alcohol. So around 20 to 30% of the deaths there are due to alcohol, whether that's the liver disease or drinking and driving. So overall, in most countries, 2 to 5% of deaths are associated with alcohol usage. Now, this is how alcohol is produced. So yeast is added to grains or fruits, and then yeast can consume these sugars from the grains or fruit and produce pyruvate. Then pyruvate can be converted into acetaldehyde and then ethanol. And then this ethanol is secreted out of the yeast into the beverage of choice. So the other fermentation reaction that can occur is this malolactic fermentation reaction, where malic acid is converted to lactic acid. And one of the bacterial species that does this conversion is Oni, that converts, so it converts malic acid to lactic acid, which results in a creamier flavor in alcohol. And again, the mechanism action, like with most of these substances, is not completely well known for alcohol. So alcohol enhances the effect of GABA signaling. So GABA signaling is a major inhibitory neurotransmitter. So when alcohol is consumed, it would stimulate GABA signaling, which results in a feeling of relaxation or tiredness. And alcohol can affect other neurotransmitter signaling systems as well, such as serotonin and dopamine, but we're not going to go over that today. And the catabolic pathway of alcohol in humans is as follows. This occurs in the liver. So ethanol is first converted to acetaldehyde, and then acetaldehyde is converted to lactate. Now the alcohol flush reaction is a result of an allele of ALDH2. So this allele is called ×2 and is prevalent in a lot of East Asian populations. So around 30 to 50% of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean populations have this flush type of phenotype. So what this means is when people with this allele drinks alcohol, their face turns more inflamed because they are unable to get rid of the accumulated acetaldehyde in their systems. So this is the genetics behind the alcohol flush reaction. So this acetaldehyde dehydrogenase reaction is less efficient in those with the ×2 allele. This results in accumulated acetaldehyde. And this acetaldehyde is toxic, which is why it gives a facial flush reaction. Now we're gonna talk about an interesting mind-altering parasite called Toxoplasma gondii. So this parasite is responsible for a disease that typically has no obvious symptoms. It is one of the most common parasites in developed countries. So an estimated 30 to 50% of the global population have been exposed to or infected with this parasite. And this parasite is shown to alter host behavior through changes in the dopamine signaling pathway. So this is what a host cell infected with Toxoplasma gondii looks like. Now, the life cycle of this parasite goes as follows. So the rats are exposed to cat feces that contain the parasites. And then the rats get infected, and then the parasites travel up to the rat's brain. And then the parasites start manipulating the mental state of the rat decreasing the rat's aversion to cat urine and making the rat more impulsive overall. As a result, they are more likely to get captured and eaten by a cat. Then the cat, after consuming the infected rat, would also be infected with this parasite. And then again, the cat can spread the parasite onto a human host and also other rats through its feces. Now, this parasite, as I said before, can alter dopamine signaling, in rats at least. So in rats, the levels of norepinephrine signaling is much lower in infected rats. However, infected rats have a higher dopamine signaling in the cells of infected rats. So the proposed reason behind this observation is that the Toxoplasma gondii has these aromatic amino acid hydroxylases, 1 and 2. So the parasite could be donating these hydroxylases to its human hosts, or human or rat or cat hosts, in order to generate more dopamine. And this is why you see an increased amount of dopamine signaling in the hosts of infected patients. And then ultimately, the changes in dopamine signaling could alter rodent behavior or even human-cat behavior. So in terms of how this parasite affects human behavior, there is some evidence linking the parasite infection to increase schizophrenia, suicide attempts, and traffic accidents, and a host of other mental illnesses as well. In fact, looking at a larger study of whether this parasite alters human behavior or personality, based on this study, it looks like there isn't much significance between infection and different mental disorders, impulse control, and personality. The only significant factor that they found is infected humans are more likely to have delayed recall, but that is a minor significance of 0.04. So just barely significant. So there's low evidence to suggest that T. gondii alters human personality or behavior. So here's another example of a parasite, a fungi in this case, that can alter its host's behavior. So this fungi is able to infect carpenter ants and manipulate the ant's behavior in order to spread its own spores. So ants would unknowingly pick up the spores from the fungi off the forest floor. The fungi infects the ant's cells and secretes a host of metabolites, which takes over the ant's central nervous system. And then the ant would be manipulated to travel up a certain height and grab onto the underside of a leaf at an optimum height of 25 centimeters from the forest floor. The reason why the fungi wants the ant to travel specifically 25 cm from the forest floor is because that's the ideal height required to spread its spores efficiently. Then the fungal plants would also infect the ant's muscle cells and alter the organelle numbers, specifically the mitochondrial numbers and the amino acid balance, in order to get the ant to form a death grip on the underside of the leaf, resulting in the ant being stuck on the underside of the leaf. Once this occurs, the parasite would kill the ant shortly after and start producing its reproductive structure, which is this object here. So this structure forms out of the ant's brain. And once it is completed, the parasite, or the fungi in this case, would spread its spores from the reproductive structure, and then the spores can infect other ants. So this fungi is known to take out entire colonies of ants. So that's it for the lecture today. There are no learning objectives because this is an interest lecture. So I hope this lecture was interesting and you learned something from it.